pleasure to introduce a professor who I've admired for many years. Les Swanson, who is honorary consul for Iceland and has served in that capacity since 2001. 2001. I know we took our first trip to Iceland in 2001. He also serves as an adjunct professor on the faculty here at Portland State in the graduate program for conflict resolution. He is a lawyer in private practice, specializing in tort work, medical malpractice, and so he is, I would say, eminently qualified to address us on the issues of both the Icelandic sagas and the lawyers who figure in them. And with that, I will introduce Les
Thank you, Chris. So we're going to talk about the lawyers in Njal's saga, the clever and the just. But we'll have to work up to it a little bit. And as we get there, I'll give you some instructions. We can have some audience participation because at one point I'll be telling you about some rules that were laid down by Njal when he established what was called the Fifth Court in Iceland. And then we'll get into some court proceedings where these rules actually play a role. And when we get to the court proceedings, if you notice somebody doing something that's contrary to one of these rules, that you all just sit down, and then you can quietly hiss. You can go we'll see how quickly we pick up on the violation of these rules. Now, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about procedure and results in the law. The law obviously has a lot of procedure, it has a lot of rules, but it's also very important, well, what are the results that come out of these procedures? So we have a lot of rules about how suits can be filed, where they can be filed, during what time limits they can be filed. All these rules have to be obeyed, and they're important rules, generally furthering the cause of justice. But then again, if we hear about a trial, for example, where maybe a young girl was run down in a crosswalk by a truck that ran a red light, and a jury awarded her family $1,000 for her death, we might be offended by that. We might think $1,000 for a young girl's life, is that a just result? No matter how good the procedures were that were followed. Or take the O.J. Simpson case. Let's assume that all the legal procedures were followed in the O.J. Simpson case and the jury finds O.J. not guilty. Many Americans wondered whether or not that verdict was fair to Nicole Simpson and to the Goldman family. And somehow when Johnny Cochran stood up and said, well, if the glove doesn't fit, then acquit, and when he played the race card, people wondered some after O.J. was acquitted and found not guilty, did procedure really get us to a just result in that case? Now, it's part of a lawyer's job to know the rules. If a lawyer doesn't know the rules, at least in the area then that can be a bit of a problem. And the lawyer needs to know the exceptions to the rules, because every rule has its exceptions, and so when someone else applies the rule and it's working against me and my client, then I ought to know what the exceptions to that rule are so that I can aid my client's cause. Well, it was the same in Iceland in the 10th and 11th centuries. It wasn't any different than it is right now. There was a lot of process in Icelandic law. In fact, Icelandic law, I would say, exalted process. There really wasn't too much of an issue about what happened and whether or not somebody was guilty. The issues seem to be more about getting to the court and following the right procedures to eventually get to the point where somebody could say, yes, that person is guilty. Now, there were no rules of law written down in Iceland. They were all oral. The law speaker, who was supposed to be the best lawyer in the country, and who was appointed law speaker and who stood at the law rock and presided over the most important legal proceedings, had to know the law by memory. And every year he had to recite from the law rock 1/3 of the rules of law to demonstrate that, in fact, by memory, he did know these rules. So an Icelandic lawyer had to be smart, had to be sharp with regard to how to use these rules to the client's advantage. Or another way of saying that is that an Icelandic lawyer had to be clever. Now, being clever has both a positive and a negative connotation, right? A clever person is a resourceful person. Somebody who can marshal a lot of knowledge and skillfully find the way to a successful conclusion. Now, that's a kind of positive version of a clever person. Try this version. A clever person may be a resourceful person who can marshal a lot of knowledge and skillfully manipulate others to make mistakes from which the clever person can benefit. Now it sounds a little different. So the clever may be good, the clever may not be so good. Part of the reason I chose this title, actually, are you okay?
Yeah, the whole lady there.
Part of the reason I chose this title was because Icelanders today use the word clever a lot. I don't know about Icelandic because I don't understand it, but they all speak English and I converse with them in English and they use the word clever a lot. Clever politician, clever lawyer, clever this, clever that. It's a common term in their vocabulary. Now, generally, we like and admire people who believe in justice and who are willing to work for justice and who are fair to others and respectful of them. And we generally admire generosity. A generous person is generally a good person. And a generous person does not necessarily insist to what he or she is entitled to under the rules. In fact, a generous person may believe that people are generally capable of being better than has been proven in the past. And they may be able to promote better understanding, maybe goodwill, and maybe even peace. And sometimes they may do that by not accepting what they would be entitled to under the rules to indicate their good faith that they really want something good to happen here and want other people to give as well. We'll see a few people like this in Njal's Saga. There aren't many in Njal's Saga like this. You'd count them on less than the fingers on one hand, I think. And there are many, many in Njal's Saga that don't fall into that category. But there are some there, and we'll meet a couple of them. Honor is a problem in Njal's Saga. You could say honor was a problem in 10th and 11th century Iceland. Leaving a killing of a loved one unavenged was a matter of honor. And the women in the saga, I'm sad to say on behalf of the women assembled here, are very keen on upholding the family honor in Njal's Saga. The men may have the impulse to avenge the death of a family member, but the women in the saga are often the ones who inflame that impulse and promise eternal shame to the men who are not manly enough to draw blood that has been drawn against them. Now, honor, like all of the virtues, is many-sided too. We may feel honor-bound to treat people with fairness and to treat them respectfully, or we may feel honor-bound to do harm for harm that has been done to us. It's not always clear where we are with honor. There's certainly a positive and a negative side to it, and there's much more to honor than what I've just said. Now, if we accept a blow without retaliation, are we just inviting more blows, or are we demonstrating that a blow is of less consequence when it is not returned in kind. In the Njal Saga, most blows are returned in kind. But there are exceptions, and we will see one of these men in action. His name is Hall of Sida, who, when an all-out battle breaks out at the Thing, the Parliament, the annual meeting that constituted the Icelandic Parliament, he takes the high road, shows a generous and altruistic spirit, and is able, with the help of others, to broker peace. Hall of Sida is a just man in the saga, and he lives on. We'll also meet Eyjolf Bolverksson, one of Iceland's greatest lawyers at the time. He was a clever man in the saga, and he dies with a spear through his middle. So what about Njal Saga itself, for a little introduction? It's set, as I said, in the 10th and 11th centuries. Njal was born around 935 and died around 1010. So all the events in the Njal Saga take place during that period of time. The saga itself was written in the 13th century, in the year 1280. We don't know whether Njal Saga was written by one person or by several people, but it's certainly a very coherent piece of literature. It certainly is a piece of literature that looks like it would be written by one person, but it wasn't necessarily. We don't know who the author of Njal Saga was. And you can see that it was almost 300 years after the events that are recalled in Njal Saga that the story is actually written down. All of this passed down orally over the centuries, some of it having a historical basis and much of it, of course, being an embellished story. It's hard to tell how much is history and how much is story because they were woven together in the saga. Now, when the Njal Saga was written in 1280, Iceland was virtually in a state of civil war. Actually, it had been in a state of civil war prior to 1280 because it was 1272 when the people of Iceland got together and actually asked the King of Norway to become the ruler of their country. Before that, Icelanders had been free. They were a free country from its founding in 870. All the settlement basically took place between 870 and 930. By the time we get to 930, there are 4,000 to 4,500 farms in Iceland, all having been staked out by the people who came there over that 60-year period. Maybe there are 20,000 Icelanders at that time. And in 930 is when they establish their parliament, the Thing, and the meeting place was the Althing, and that meeting place in Iceland is at Thingvellir. Not far from Reykjavik, within an hour and a half or so. You can go out to Thingvellir, the outdoor parliament, and it's in a gorge, a rift in the earth where the North Atlantic plate and the European plate, two of the 7 plates that form the crust of the earth, come together under Iceland. Iceland's kind of in the shape of like a dragon almost, with the dragon's head up in the northwest corner. And those 2 plates come together and create a rift just about right down the middle from the southwest up to the northeast. And if Reykjavik is, say, over here, then Thingvellir is over there, not far. It's in the rift. You can see the walls of the canyon on the one side where a small river runs down through the outdoor parliament into the largest lake in Iceland. And then if you drive 6-7 miles in the opposite direction, you'll come to the raised portion of the other lake. And so all of Iceland's thermal energy is right along this line. Not all of it, but most of it. A lot of it is, because that's where you have access beneath the Earth's crust to the heat trapped below. Well, okay. Iceland was in a state of civil war in the 13th century. Why? They were in a state of civil war because a few families in Iceland, including the Sturla family of Snorri Sturluson, had acquired great wealth and power. A few other families had acquired great wealth and power, and these families were at each other, basically putting the country into a state of civil war. So bad that the people of Iceland decided to go to the King of Norway, ask them to be king, and then signed a document that made themselves subjects of the King of Norway. And that lasted, that stage, you could say, of not being its own democratic republic, lasted for Iceland until 1944. So, almost 700 years until in 1944, Iceland became a republic, was admitted to the United Nations. During the Second World War, while Denmark was under Nazi occupation, an agreement had been made that in 1944, either Iceland would become a free republic, or there would be some new agreement reached with the government of Denmark. And while government was under Nazi occupation, the Icelanders said, well, we want to be free. The United States immediately recognized Iceland because Iceland played a huge role in World War II for the Allies. And after 700 years, then Iceland became a democratic republic again. Now, laws play an important part in the Njal Saga, but we should know that not one legal case in the saga is ever successfully concluded. There's a lot of law in the saga, but there aren't many good conclusions reached as a result of it. Now, there's a lot of negotiation in the saga between parties, and successful negotiations. There's also mediation, where a third party is coaching two parties to get together. Sometimes that worked in the saga. And then sometimes there was arbitration, where a trusted person would be allowed to make the decision between two or several warring parties, or a panel of people would be appointed to make that decision. And that was sometimes successful. But the actual legal process itself in the saga never produces a successful result. Now, there's a problem with law in Iceland in the 10th and 11th centuries. The big problem is this. There is no government, there is no national government, there is no police force, there are no judicial officials, there is nobody to enforce a judgment that is actually worked out in the course of the law. Judgments have to be self-enforced. And the only way that people could enforce judgments when it was a really serious matter was probably to use force or violence. And so that, of course, engendered force and violence in return. And there we are, down the road. Now, there's a lot of violence in the Njal Saga, and we'll talk a little bit about some of that violence tonight, but there isn't much suffering. There isn't much suffering because people die quickly. These wounds are serious, the head is off, the bleeding is profuse and immediate. Life is short after a wound is inflicted in an Icelandic battle. So there's a lot of death, but not an awful lot of suffering. Now we should also note that Njal himself is not one of these killers. Njal, the central figure in his saga, well, one of the central figures, there are really two central figures in the saga, Gunnar and Njal. We're not going to talk about Gunnar at all tonight, but he was a great warrior and a great man, but he didn't last to the end of the saga. Neither did Njal. But Njal was not a man known for his physical strength, or for his courage, or for his skills in battle. In fact, his enemies refer to him as Old Beardless. Njal could not grow a beard. And they referred to his sons, these are the enemies, referred to his sons as dung beardlings. Now, Njal was known as a truth teller, as a prophet, and he was one of Iceland's most skilled lawyers. Maybe the most skilled lawyer while he was alive in Iceland. He knew it all. And he trains one of his foster sons, Thorhall, and we'll meet him later this evening. He trains Thorhall, his foster son, to be one of the great lawyers in Iceland, too. And in the saga, Njal never kills, he never fights. Only once does he carry a weapon, and then it's a useless short axe. Wouldn't have even tried to use it. Okay, let's get to Njal's enemies, because we have to meet the enemies to find out what's going on before we end up at the thing for this big legal battle between the best lawyers in Iceland. So we'll start off with Thrain Sigfusson. Now you have this list. He's on the bad guy list. I think he's right at the top.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I need that list. No, that's fine. I've got mine right here. Thank you. I'm going to take yours. Yeah, he's right at the top. Rich, powerful, a big show-off. That's Thrain. Now my cousin Thane is here. Thane Simpson, who is a lawyer. He's going to keep me on the straight and narrow tonight. Notice his name is spelled differently. T-H-A-I-N, not T-H-R-A-I-N. Now Thrain ends up being one of the enemies of Njal and his sons. He's a man rich in property, skilled in every way, and very powerful. He's so powerful that in a fit of anger, Thrain one night declares to his wife, when she complains about him, that I am divorced from you. And he takes on a new, younger wife in the same day and gets away with it. Now Thrain sailed to Norway, and there he befriended the powerful Earl Hakon, the ruler of Norway. But a man known as Killer Rapp, he's on here, third down amongst the bad guys. Killer Rapp was a friend of Thrain's, and Killer Rapp ends up destroying one of Earl Hakon's temples. It's a pagan temple, but he ends up destroying this pagan temple and kills some of the Earl's men and steals valuable property, and then runs down to the ocean side and tries to get on a ship, either with Thrain, who was there with his men about ready to leave, or with Njal's sons, who are there in Norway. They have their own ship and they're about ready to leave. So when Killer Rapp comes running up to Njal's sons, they will have nothing to do with him. They know what he's done. They don't want to be mixed up in this. You're a bad man, go away. But Thrain ends up taking Killer Rapp on board his ship. Not only does he take him on board his ship, but Earl Hakon and his men come down to the coast looking for Killer Rapp, and they search the ship 3 times. And each time they leave and they come back, and Thrain Sigfusson hides Killer Rapp in a different place each time in the ship. And they elude Earl Hakon. And they take off and return to Iceland, and Killer Rapp becomes one of Thrain's chief henchmen. Now the Earl's men feel that they've been tricked. Thrain is gone, but Njal's sons have not left on their ship. They're from Iceland too. Maybe they have Killer Rapp, or maybe they're part of this subterfuge. And so the Earl's men take it out on Njal's sons. This results in fighting. Some men are killed. Finally, there's a settlement, but Njal's sons have been caused a lot of trouble here by Thrain, Killer Rap, and the union between them, and Killer Rap getting on his ship and going away. Now, they're pretty upset about this, and they believe Thrain to be a treacherous person, but even more importantly, when they get back to Iceland, they hear that Thrain Sigfusson and his men are going around calling Njal's sons dung beardlings and the like. So we have a good old Western showdown. Now here's the way that the writer of Njal's Saga describes it. The Njalsons often spoke to Kari, who was Njal's son-in-law, about going with them to Grota. And finally he did, and said that it would be good for them to hear Thrain's words for themselves. So the four Njalsons, Skarphedin, they're over here on the good guy, bad guy list. Skarphedin is Njal's eldest son, Grim, next eldest, Helgi, next eldest, Hoskold, a foster son of Njal. Those four sons of Njal, along with Kari, the brother-in-law, go to Grota. Now, the saga writer says the porch at Grota was wide, and many men could stand there side by side. Now, there was a woman outdoors, and she saw the approach of the Njalsons and told Thrain. He ordered his men to take their weapons and to the porch, and they did. Thrain stood in the middle, and on either side of him stood Killer Rap and Granny Gunnarsson. And next came Gunnar Lambeson, and then Loden and Torvi, and then Lambi Sigurdsson, and then the others one by one, for all the men were at home. Skarphedin, the oldest son, and the others walked up to them, with Skarphedin in the lead. Then Kari, then Hoskold, and Grim, and Helgi. And when they came up, there were no greetings at all from those who were waiting. Skarphedin said, "Welcome to us all." Hallgerd, long legs, beautiful woman with hair down to her waist, who has caused one hell of a lot of trouble in this saga, was standing on the porch and had whispered something to Rap. She spoke. "No one standing here will say that you are welcome." Skarphedin spoke. "Your words don't count, for you're either a cast-off hag or a whore." Hallgerd replies, "You'll be paid for those words before you go home." Helgi spoke. "I've come, Thrain, to see if you will make me some compensation for the shameful treatment I suffered in Norway because of you." Thrain spoke. "I never thought that you brothers would try to get money out of your manhood. How long do you intend to carry on this begging?" "Many would say," said Helgi, "that you should have offered compensation since your life was at stake." Then Rap spoke. "It shows a difference in our luck that you were treated shamefully and we slipped away. The blow fell where it should have." "There's very little luck," said Helgi, "in breaking faith with the Earl and taking up with you." "Aren't I the one you should be asking for redress?" said Rap. "I'll pay you, as I think fitting." "The only exchange between us," said Helgi, "won't do you any good." Skarphedin spoke. "Let's not exchange words with Rap, but just pay him a red skin for his gray one. A skin without skin, and the gray one that he's in now." Rap spoke. "Be quiet, Skarphedin. I won't be stingy about driving my axe into your head." "It remains to be seen," said Skarphedin, "which of us will be placing stones over the other's head." "Go home, dung beardlings," said Hallgerd. "We're going to call you that from now on, and we'll call your father Old Beardless." They did not leave until all those who faced them except Thrain had made themselves guilty of using those words. Thrain tried to restrain them from using those words. Now the final showdown comes a few pages later. The Nolsons leave Thrain and his men, but then some old women come and report to Njál's wife, Bergortha, that the biggest show-offs around, Thrain and his men, were loud-mouthed and foul-mouthed in talking about Bergortha's husband and sons when they saw them coming across the river. That does it. The four Nolsons and Kari set out to confront Thrain and his 7 men. So we've got 5 against 7. They see Thrain and his men on the other side of the river. They're right over here. They're on this big, slick piece of ice. I don't know, maybe 50 yards long or something, in the river. They're coming up over along here. Skarphedin, Helgi, Grim, Hoskell. Skarphedin has his shoelace come untied. So he has to stop and tie his shoe. While he stops and ties his shoe, the other men get ahead and they're heading up for this ice bridge up above. And over the ice bridge they're going to get at Thrain and his men. Now this is one of the best action pieces in the saga, so that's why I've got to illustrate it. Okay, so now Skarphedin ties his shoe. The other guys are up ahead here. He's not going to catch up with them. But he sees these floating pieces of ice out here. And Skarphedin is an athletic and courageous guy. So he jumps onto the first piece of ice, picks up speed, jumps onto the second piece, jumps over to the third piece, jumps onto the big piece of ice. By that time he's moving at a high rate of speed. So he's skating down here, he brings his axe up over his head, comes by Thrain right here, who is just putting on his helmet, getting ready for battle, puts his axe down through Thrain's head, splits him down to the shoulders, knocks out all of his molars on both sides and fall onto the ice, and scoots on past. One of the guys further up throws a shield out in front of him. He jumps over the shield, comes up here. By this time, they're up here. They meet, they come back, they do battle. So Thrain's out of the picture. And his teeth are lying on the big slick piece of ice.
And no suffering. No suffering.
No suffering. No, there was no time for suffering. Yes, the author of Njál's Saga describes him as being like a bird in flight as he's heading down that piece of ice, and then is able to come to a stop at the end of it as well. Just when Kari, the son-in-law, Njál's son, just as Kari is coming over the ice bridge, then Skarphedin ends up at the end of the big piece of ice, and Kari says to him, "A manly attack, that." Now the action continues to build. More men are killed, including Killer Rapp. He meets his end. Very little pain. And Thrain's kinfolk are now compelled to seek revenge for the killing of Thrain and these men. Now they have to come back and seek revenge against the Nolsons. Well, Njal gets the news. Now Njal is an older man. He was born in 935. He dies when he's 75 years old, and he's getting up in years, especially for an Icelander of that time. So when he hears about this, he acts quickly and he offers compensation to Thrain's brother for Thrain's death, and offers compensation for all the other men killed. And you can look at your little compensation sheet there, not the good guy, bad guy sheet, but the other sheet. Compensation for a good man in Iceland, was 200 ounces of silver. That was standard compensation. You paid, if you killed somebody, you paid 200 ounces of silver and hope for peace. But in this case, after Njal offers compensation to Thrain's brother, they select arbitrators, and the arbitrators decide the compensation to be paid, and Njal pays it immediately with no hesitation. And later Njal goes even further, because Thrain has left behind a son, Hoskuld. Hoskuld's on the good guy list. He's second on the good guy list. That's Thrain's son, who becomes the foster son of Njal. So not only does Njal pay for the death of Thrain and of his men, but in a gesture of goodwill, he accepts Thrain's son Hoskuld into his own household. And he then raised Hoskuld as his foster son and did everything that he could for Hoskuld and loved him very much. And the sons of Njal took Hoskuld along everywhere and did all that they could to favor him. And time passed, and Hoskuld became fully grown. He was big and strong, a very handsome man, with beautiful hair, fair of speech, generous, even-tempered, skilled in fighting, but he had a kind word for everyone. He was well-liked, and he and the sons of Njal never disagreed about anything. And it comes time for Njal now to arrange a marriage for his foster son Hoskuld. And there was a great chieftain named Flossie. Flossie's over here on the good guy, bad guy list, down in the middle. Flossie has a niece named Hildegard. Now here's the way the Saga writer describes Hildegard. I better get going here. Hildegard was a woman with a mind of her own and very beautiful. Few women could match her skill at handiwork. She was an unusually tough and harsh-tempered woman, but a fine woman when she had to be. Now Hildegard will not consider marrying Hoskuld because Hoskuld does not have a good. Okay, what is a godard? Well, you can be a godard, and if you're a godard, then you're one of the godee, the plural of godard. And who are the godee? The godee are the chieftains in Iceland. They're the big shots. They're the people, each of whom has a godord. Now, godord isn't a piece of ground. It isn't a district as such. But as a practical matter, it encompasses, obviously, something like a district. It's really the authority over the people in that particular area that constitutes a godord. And there are only 36 of these in Iceland. Iceland's divided into 4 quarters. South, north, east, west. Each quarter has 9 godee. So there are 36 in total. Hildegard says to Njal, who wants to present Hoskuld as her husband, she said, I'm not going to marry him. He's not a godai. He doesn't have a godord. My father promised me that I would be married to somebody who had a godord, and Hoskuld doesn't have one, so it's no deal. I'm not going to marry him. Well, we'll see shortly how Njal dealt with that problem, and he did. He solved the problem, and Hoskuld and Hildegard get married. And Njal bought land for them and hired servants for them, and Hildegard's uncle, who is Flossie, paid out the dowry, and they lived for a long time in their new land, and Hoskuld and Njal's sons added to each other's prestige. So fervent was their friendship that they invited each other to a feast every autumn and exchanged generous gifts. But good times never last in the saga. Hoskel's Godor prospers at the expense of the Godor of another man named Mord. Mord's father returns from a trip abroad. He's left Mord in charge of his Godor, and he finds it depleted. The men in his Godor have gone over and paid allegiance to Hoskel in his Godor. He says to Mord, you better do something about this. You better do something about it fast. So Mord plots against Hoskel. And he tells the Nalsons many lies about Hoskel. And he gets the Nalsons all worked up about Hoskel. Now he goes to Hoskel and he tells them lies too about the Nalsons. And here's what Hoskel says to him. He says, I would much rather suffer death from them than do them any harm. And he chastises Mord for telling such lies to him. But Hoskel goes to Nal's sons and tells them similar lies, and they begin to believe them.
Mord.
Pardon?
Mord goes to.
Yeah, Mord. I'm sorry. Yeah, Mord goes to the Nalsons and tells them these lies. So Hoskel goes out into the fields one morning. He's wearing a fine scarlet cloak trimmed with lace down to his hem that his uncle, the powerful chieftain Flossie, gave him. He's carrying his seed basket in one hand because he's a farmer, and he has his sword in his other hand. And Scarfadon and his brothers and their brother-in-law Kari and Mord all set upon him. Scarfadon lands the first blow to Hoskel's head, the others each strike a blow. They all participate in the killing. Completely innocent man, a beloved son of Njal, and their dearly beloved foster brother up to this time. Njal is heartbroken. He's touched with such grief that he exclaims that he would rather have lost 2 of his own sons. And Njal predicts what will follow, my death and that of my wife and of all my sons. And that's exactly what happens. But first there are some serious efforts at making a settlement. Hildegard goes to her uncle Flossie, the great chieftain, and when Flossie has finished eating, she takes the scarlet coat with lace down to the hem that Hoskel dyed. Hoskel is Hildegard's husband. She places that coat over the shoulders of Flossie when he finishes his dinner, and all the dry blood runs down onto Flossie. And Hildegard says to Flossie, this cloak, Flossie, was your gift to Hoskel, and now I give it back to you. He was slain in it. In the name of God and all good men, I charge you by all the powers of your Christ, and by your courage and manliness to avenge all the wounds which he received in dying, or else be an object of contempt to all men. Flossie flung off the cloak, threw it into her arms, and said, you are the worst monster and want us to take the course which will be worst for us all. Cold are the counsels of women. Sorry about that. Now Flossie and his supporters and Njal and his supporters head to the thing where each plans on wooing even more supporters to their cause. Scarfadon is dressed in a black tunic, blue striped trousers, high black boots, has a silver belt around his waist, and he has an axe that he calls the battle hag and a small shield, and around his head he has a silk band. His hair is combed back over his ears. He has blondish, reddish hair, a very pale face, a very sharp face, and an ugly mouth, and he looks a complete warrior. And at the thing there's a man named Thorkel Bullock. He's one of the bad guys on here. The famous killer. He killed half beast and half man in Finland. In Estonia, he killed the flying dragon, and he killed many human troublemakers as well. And Thorkel claimed that there was no one in Iceland who refused to fight in single combat or would ever give way to. So the Nalsons go to Thorkel at the thing. They're going to try to woo him to their side now in this dispute that they're in with Flossie. And Thorkel says, who's that big frightening man who goes fifth in line, pale looking and sharp featured with a wicked and luckless look about him? And Scarfadon replies, my name is Scarfadon, and there's no need for you to pick out insulting words for me. And also, I've noticed that you're probably handier at dairy work amidst your little household at Oxera than being here in the Ting where we do lawsuits and that sort of thing. You really ought to pick from your teeth the pieces from the mare's arse you ate before riding to the thing. Your shepherd watched you and was shocked that you could do such a filthy thing. Thorkel sprang up in great anger, seized his short sword and spoke, I got this sword in Sweden where it killed a mighty champion for it. I've since killed many others. As soon as I'm close enough, I'll run you through with it. Scarfedon stood with his axe at the ready and grinned and said, told him what he did on the river. I've never lifted a weapon against any man without hitting my mark. And without that, he broke away from his brothers and rushed over to Thorkel and put the axe up behind him and said, Thorkel, bully, sheath your sword and sit down or I'll smash this axe into your head and split it down your shoulders. Then Thorkel sheathed his sword at once and sat down. Such a thing had never happened to him, before or after. Well, okay, we're going to have to move ahead here. We're going to have to move ahead.
May I ask another question?
Yes.
Well,
Or-
is this, it's me, or?
Oh, you're right in front of me,
Right in
yes.
front, yeah. Is this historical or is it all fictitious?
Well, if you go to Iceland now, they'll take you around all the places, Njal farm, and all the events in
Oh,
the
yeah.
Saga and so on. They're kind of identifiable geographical places.
Uh-huh.
Njal probably lived. Now, you know, were these people just like this and did these things happen? Probably not.
Then
not-
somebody
not
has
just
used
the
poetic
way.
license, right?
Yeah, poetic license, some stories passed down, some history mixed with
Right.
good literature. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, who wrote this, the Knolls, or who wrote this, the Knolls? or-
No, we don't know who wrote Njal Saga. We don't know the author. It's unknown. The manuscript comes down to us, but it's not signed and nobody has any idea as to who wrote it.
Is that manuscript in Iceland or has it gone to the Library of Congress?
You think that because we can wage war in Iraq, we can take all of Iceland's documents? They're not in the Library of Congress. I think Njal Saga is over in Iceland, but I haven't seen it. It'd either be in Denmark or
They
Iceland. I'm
stayed
sure
in
it's in
Denmark
Iceland.
for a long time.
Stayed in Denmark,
I'll
okay.
bet the Danes have sent it back.
Yeah, they had to put it back, but it wasn't after the war though.
It's in Iceland, there's these.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Well, now, let's jump ahead here. Well, this is the continuation of the story. Now that Thrain has been killed, Flossie has to achieve some justice vis-a-vis the Nolsons. Now, we've seen what efficient killers the Nolsons are, especially Scarfedon. And Flossie pretty well knows that if he goes into anything against the Nolsons, he's either got to kill him, or him and all of his men who are involved are going to die, because eventually they'll be hunted down and killed by the Nolsons themselves and their friends. So Flossie organizes his group, 100 men or so. They come up to Njál's farmhouse. Njál's there with his wife, his grandson is there, his 3 sons, his foster son is now dead, Hoskold, but his 3 sons and his son-in-law, Kari, are all there. Scarfedon says, we must stay outside the house and defend ourselves. Njál says, no, we'll go into the house. We'll defend ourselves from within the house, and if we die, we'll all die together. And Njál has already foretold their deaths. So they go into the house. And Flossie and his men are throwing spears at them, and these valiant warriors inside the house, when they come flying through a window, are catching them and throwing them back out and killing Flossie's men. So Flossie's watching his men be depleted through this spear throwing contest, and he's getting nowhere. And he says, okay, this is it. The only way we're going to finish these people off is to burn the house. Now, burning in Iceland was the worst, most serious crime that you could commit. To burn a house was the most serious crime. To burn a person in the house was the utmost serious crime. Why? Well, I mean, it's a horrible thing to do to begin with, but I mean, timber is scarce. I mean, you build up a house, you've got these timber supports, and so you can't survive through the winter if you don't have a house. I mean, a house was important to survival. So they set the house on fire. They set the house on fire, and Helgi and Kari decide eventually that they're going to come out and make a run for it. And Helgi comes out, and Flossie gets him with his sword, lops his head off. That's the end of Helgi. Helgi's already gotten a couple before then, but then he loses his head. Kari is able to run through the smoke and escape. And Kari, the son-in-law, a valiant warrior who swears revenge against Flossie and his men to the very end and achieves much of it in terms of violence, is alive at the end of the saga and is an honored and valued person. But the rest of them die in the house. Now, let me tell you before Njal died what he did in setting up a fifth court. He decided that instead of having 4 districts with 4 courts, he decided that there should be a fifth court in Iceland. And the fifth court would be the one that would resolve the disputes between the other courts. If a case couldn't be decided in another one of the 4 quarter courts, then it could come to the fifth court. If there was a procedural difficulty between 2 of the courts or something, it could come to the fifth court. So the fifth court was a kind of, you could say, a higher court of appeals. Now, in order to do that, Njal said, well, we have 9 godai in each quarter, so we're going to increase that 9 to 12. And so that will make 48 godai in all. And these 48 godai will sit in the fifth court, but because 36, 4 times 4, has been our number for so long, the rule will be that when a case goes to the fifth court, the prosecution will challenge 6, and the defense can challenge 6, and we'll get back down to the 36, which has to be the number that decides any case by consensus. So that's going to be one of the rules. Prosecution lops off 6, the defense lops off 6, we end up with 36, we're in the fifth court. Now another rule in the fifth court is no payment to the lawyer. Lawyers get nothing. Here, they're either doing it because of their allegiance to their client or they're operating in violation of the rules. Okay, so the people in Iceland go along with Njal, who is considered to be their leading law person, before he dies, and they establish this fifth court. And now we have Flossie's men having burned down Njal's house, and so now we're going to end up at the Ting. We're going to be back here. We're going to be back here at Thingvellir, and we're going to try these lawsuits. And the lawsuits are going to be brought on behalf of Njal and his family against Flossie. So the suits are against Flossie. A man named Mord is chosen to represent Njal's family.
Not the same one.
Pardon?
Not the same Mort that stirred up the trouble in the first place.
Yes. Same one. He's on my list of bad guys over here, I think. Mort is, he's a malicious guy, he spreads rumors, but he knows the law and he speaks with a silver tongue. He has a silver tongue. And the Icelanders admire him for that. But don't worry about that. Mort is out front. But Thorhall, another foster son of Njal, is the real lawyer on Njal's side. He has a wounded leg. He's back at the booth. He can't be up there at the trial. But every time Mort gets into trouble, they send a messenger back to Thorhall, and Thorhall tells them what to do. Because Thorhall is one of the 3 greatest lawyers in Iceland. On the other side, defending, representing Flossie, is Njal. Njal Bogartson. He's on the bad guy list. Yeah. Bogartson. Njal Bogartson is a greedy and tricky lawyer. Well, when they get to the king, Mort has been chosen to prosecute these suits. Now, Flossie needs a lawyer. He doesn't have any lawyers in his band. One is recommended to him, but his friend says, you know, that guy's related to me, and whoever defends this case is going to die, so why don't you choose somebody else? Flossie says, well, I don't know any lawyers, do you? And his friend Bjarni says, well, yeah, there's Eyjolf Bogartson over in the West Fjords. He's one of the 3 best lawyers in the country, the best lawyer there, and he's a guy who likes money, and his whole family likes money. And so they go looking for Eyjolf at the thing. They're going to talk to him, and they find him, and they flatter him. And Eyjolf says, "Why are you flattering me? It sounds like you want me to get involved in this lawsuit. I don't have any dog in this fight. I'm not going to get involved." And Halgerd the Strong, who was with Bjarni and Flossie, picks him up and sits him down between Bjarni and Halgerd. He says, you know, I think you ought to just sit here for a moment. And he says something like, you know, the first blow with an axe usually does not bring down the tree. So wait here and be patient. He sits down, and Flossie pulls up his sleeve and pulls off a gold bracelet that's worth 1,200 Ls. You can look on your compensation sheet and see that 1,200 Ls is quite a bit of money. So there's this beautiful gold bracelet, and Njal says, "Oh, I see that you people actually are friendly toward me, and I think I can be of some use to you. And well, of course, I'll be happy to represent you. But because Njal knows that, because he knows the law, because he's one of the 3 best lawyers in Iceland, he knows that in the 5th court." If this case ever gets to the 5th court, he knows he's in big trouble because he's accepted payment, and Flossie's going to be in big trouble too. Because what happens in Iceland, under Icelandic law, in the 10th and 11th century, is that if you break the procedure, if you break the rules of procedure, then it not only can invalidate your case, but it gives the other side a right to bring a case against you, a serious case against you that could even result in your being declared an outlaw. So Njal enters into this very wary of what may happen here if this case gets to the 5th court. So the legal proceedings begin, and in Icelandic legal proceedings there are a lot of witnessing. Everything is witnessed. Like I said, it's all procedure. Witnesses witnessing what's going on. And, you know, when do we get to the facts? Well, we never get to the facts. It's always witnesses witnessing this process, and witnesses who witness the transition from this process to the next process, and witnesses being named. And then finally, you get down to 9 men and a quarter court, and they make some kind of a decision, and it turns out they're really only like a grand jury that says, well, the case is good enough to proceed, and then it has to go on to the big 36, who have to decide unanimously in order for somebody to win their case. So they end up in the thing, they're battling on all of these procedural rules, and the way it progresses is that Mord sets the whole thing up, goes through all the, it takes him a couple of days just to mention the suits and all the witnesses and everything, get everything lined up, has to say it all twice, all has to be exactly right. And then he gets to the point where he's going to name the 9-person panel. Okay, so we got these 9 persons on the panel. He names them, and then it's Eyolf's turn. And Eyolf says, well, 2 people on the panel are disqualified. One is a second cousin of Mord, and the other one held Mord when he was baptized. So they've got 2 illegal people on the panel. So Mord sends a messenger back to Thorhall, well, what do we do now? Thorhall sends back a message and he says, stand up, name your witnesses, blah, 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 blah. Tell those people who have been asked to stand up to sit down. That disqualifications for closeness of relationship apply to the plaintiffs, the people in the lawsuit. Doesn't apply to the lawyer. Oh, Eyolf says, I guess I missed that one. Okay, well, what do we do now? Eyolf comes back and he says, well, okay, there are 2 other guys who were disqualified because they're not property owners. You got to be a property owner to one of these 9. So Mord sends a messenger into Thorhall. Thorhall says, well, yeah, you got to be a property owner, or you have to be somebody who lives off of milk animals. You know, if you live off of milk animals, that means you have cows, that means you're wealthy enough, you own enough personal property, you're in a household that has enough to be substantial. So if you're somebody who lives off milk animals, you still qualify. So Mord, messenger comes back, Mord tells those 2 people, sit down, and announces that they are qualified, they live off milk animals. Flossy's now, and meanwhile the crowd of the thing is going from the prosecution to the defense and cheering and so on. Okay, so then Eyolf's next step is, okay, we didn't get there with those, but 4 of these people are disqualified because these people who were appointed, these 9 neighbors, were supposed to be the closest to the burning, and 4 of them are not, because there are 4 other qualified men who were closer to Njaal's house when it burned than these 4, and so they are disqualified. So a messenger goes back to Thorhall, and Thorhall says, well, this is getting difficult, isn't it? But what Eyolf has overlooked is that a majority of the men are qualified, and a majority is enough. Mord will be fined 3 marks for each one of these 4, Eyolf will be, Mord will be fined 3 marks for each one of these 4 that he put up there as part of the 9 when they weren't the 4 closest to Njaal's house. But the consequences of that are that Mord will just be fined 3 marks. That'll go over here to the 5th court and be decided later as a matter of process. The lawsuit can proceed. The majority of the men are qualified, so let's get on with it. Okay? So we've got all these procedures. We've got to know them all by memory. And meanwhile, sometimes they're going up to Skafti, who is the law speaker, the head law person in Iceland. And Skafti is saying things like, wow, that was perfect. Yeah, that was just right. And then when he gets down, I think to this one, he says, wow, I didn't think anybody in Iceland knew that one. I thought it was only me and Njal. Well, Njal was the teacher of Thorhall, and Njal taught Thorhall everything. Okay, so we're going to go ahead with these 5, the majority. All right, where are we? These 5, the majority. Okay, so these 5 then remain, and they act as a grand jury, and they basically decide, yeah, okay, all of this is about right. Flossie, this is all about Helgi being killed by Flossie, and then there are other prosecutions with regard to the burning and everybody who died inside the house, and so. The 5 majority on the panel say, yeah, this is about right, and we find Flossie guilty here in the East Quarter. Okay. This case has been prosecuted by Mord in the East Quarter. Why? Because that is where Flossie is a chieftain. And you bring the lawsuit in the quarter where the person resides. Flossie resides in the East Quarter. But Eyolf, just prior to these proceedings started, put his head together with Flossie and said, this is what we're going to do, Flossie. I want you to resign your chieftainship. And I want you to become a thingman, just a follower, of a Godai in the North Quarter. And then, if everything else fails at the end, we can raise this as the defect in their suit that they have brought it in the wrong quarter. They brought it in the East Quarter. They should have brought it in the North Quarter. And that lawsuit then, because it's a procedural matter, will go to the 5th Court. Now, Eyolf didn't want that to happen. He didn't want to get to this point because he didn't want to have to bring this case in the 5th Court and then have the payment for attorney fees, accepting the gold bracelet, come flying back at him. But in fact, that is what happens because Njal's men, his supporters, have been informed by Snorri, who saw the bracelet that Eyolf had accepted, and they realize that this is going on, and so Njal's men raise the fact of payment to the lawyer as a defect, and they're going to file their lawsuit in the 5th court based upon two things. There was payment to the lawyer, and they're going to file it because IOP introduced irrelevant matters into the proceedings. They're going to prosecute this case in the 5th court then, and they're going to have the advantage because they'll get there first. And then if and then IOP, because he has accepted payment, will be in trouble in the 5th court. Well, they end up in the 5th court. That's where they end up. And in the 5th court, what happens is that 48 men are seated. Remember? We increased the number from 36 to 48. So 48 men are seated to hear this matter now in the 5th court. And for this payment to the lawyer and the bringing in of irrelevant matters, Mord is asking on behalf of Njal that on each charge that it be lesser outlawry, have to leave the country for 3 years, and if there are 2 charges of lesser outlawry that are found against somebody, then they become a full outlaw. Then they have to leave forever, and they're fair game for anybody in the country to kill them, and anybody who helps them will be acting illegally themselves. So, Mord's now in the 5th court. He's proceeding with these suits. He thinks he's got things going, and he's got 48 men seated, and so Mord strikes 6 of them. He takes 6 off the panel, so we got 42 left. Now, IOP's plan is, and he tells Flossie, what we're going to do is we're not going to take off our 6. We're just going to lay back. We're going to lay back. We're not going to take off our 6. And then, if Mord doesn't come back and take off the 6 himself, there'll be 42 instead of 36, and the whole proceedings will be invalid. And in fact, that's exactly what happens. It comes IOP's turn. IOP says, we challenge none of these men, and Mord makes the mistake of going ahead with 42, and so the whole thing becomes invalid. Okay, now at this point, Thorhall, the chief lawyer, and I'll stop here shortly. Thorhall, the chief lawyer, who's back in his booth, messenger comes back, tells him what has happened. Thorhall picks up his spear, thrusts it into his leg to lance the boil, stands up without a limp, goes out with his spear, runs into Grim the Red, one of Flossie's men, and immediately strikes him dead. He is so mad. The best lawyer in Iceland is so mad about what has happened here that he picks up his spear and goes out and kills the man. And so that starts a war. Now we have a war in Parliament. This is like the State of the Union address, and congressmen start shooting each other. Okay, we're at the Parliament, we're at the annual thing meeting here, and war has broken out. Okay, at that point, we meet Hall of Sitta. Hall of Sitta is a great chieftain. He's on Flossie's side. He's related to Flossie. And Hall of Sitta has a son, Lope. And Hall says to his son, Lope, let's move over here and try to get in between these groups of men. Let's try to break this up. And then Snorri the Godai gets in with his men between the 2 groups to try to break them up. But then Hall of Sitta gets separated from Lope, and just as the 2 sides are separating, a spear comes across the chasm and strikes Lope dead. So now Hall of Sitta has lost his beloved son, Lope. But they stop the fighting. And Hall of Sitta says to the, and announces to the gathered throng of all of the chieftains of Iceland, okay, we must bring peace here. There's got to be a better way, and I will begin that better way. I will seek no compensation for the death of my son, Lot. Let us now trade off the deaths on both sides. And those deaths that cannot be traded off, then let's have compensation paid. And let's resolve this matter. And so that's what they do. Threefold compensation, 600 ounces of silver is paid for Njal, 400 ounces, twofold for Bergortha, his wife. Skarphedin is traded evenly for Hoskell. The elder son is traded evenly for the beloved foster son. Twofold compensation paid for Grim and Helgi. Single compensation paid for all the others. And Eyjolf Bolverksson, in the midst of this battle, is seen by one of Njal's supporters sneaking off someplace, and he's done in. He's killed. So Eyjolf Bolverksson, the clever lawyer, is dead. So peace comes to the thing as a result of Hall of Sitta's work. And then the people gathered there say, Hall, you should be compensated. And they put together all of their money, and they pay 800 ounces of silver to Hall of Sitta for the death of his son, Lund, that he was willing not to be paid anything for. So he ends up being well compensated. He was never clever, Hall of Sitta. He was only just, and his deeds produced good results. Eyjolf, the clever lawyer, we know what happened to him. He died, he took the risk, he played his trick card, and he ended up taking Kari's spear through his chest. A fitting end for such a clever and unjust Now we probably need refreshments without questions. You can ask me questions while we're having refreshments. What would you like to do? Anybody's free to leave.
Fabulous job.
No, I'm willing to answer questions here, but I'm also willing to go in and have a cup of coffee.
So
There's a famous saying that Njal's wife, from Njal's wife, but I don't know it in English.
Oh, from Bergortha?
Ja, grønte ville griserne, hvis de vidste, hvad galten lød.
Well, of course, I don't know what that means.
But Åse might know.
Bergortha has her beloved grandson, who is the son of Hoskell, the foster son, is in the house when it's burning. And Bergortha says to her beloved grandson, you go, because Flossie allows all of the women and servants to leave the house. He will even allow Njal and Bergortha to leave the house. Njal says, I'm an old man, and I will not be able to avenge any of these deaths, and I choose to die here. And Bergortha says, I pledged to him when we were married that we would stay together until the end, so I'm with him. And then they asked the grandson, Thord, to leave, and Thord said, my grandmother promised that she would never leave my side, and so I will not leave her side. And so they all lie down, and they're covered with a blanket, and their bodies are preserved. But of course they die from the smoke in the process. So maybe it's one of those statements.
Something about the piglets, they knew that what is it called? Yeah, like their mother was suffering.
Yeah. Okay.
All of this legal matter and laws and so on, was this written down or was it all done orally?
It's all done orally. There was nothing written in Iceland in the law until the 12th, maybe the late 11th, 12th centuries. Persons privately began to write down some of the law. No official law book, but privately they would keep records of the law. But at this time, around the year 1010, there were no written records. It was all oral.
So peace broke out in 1010, thanks to the wisdom of this one lawyer, but it lasted for how long before?
Well, a very short period of time, because Kari, the son-in-law, who is a great warrior and a fine man, has sworn vengeance on Flossie and his men for what they did to his family, and for the terrible act of burning, which cannot go unavenged in his mind. There will be no settlement for that. And he comes back and does a lot of them in. But the saga is near an end, and at the end, Kari is still alive. He's over in Norway. He's fated. He's a famous man. Flossie too comes through. He was a great chieftain. Flossie was a great chieftain. People had a lot of respect for Flossie. The only problem was that, Flossie was willing to burn and to kill, and burning was the most horrible thing you could do, so, I can't put him on the good guy list. Flossie caused one hell of a lot of trouble. But he survived and lived to the end of the saga and was a respected man.
Thank you.